So I have a confession. I have been addicted to fast fashion my entire life, which means I've stocked my closet with super trendy clothes at really low prices. And then during COVID, when I couldn't go shopping in person anymore, I got addicted to these influencer videos on Instagram.
These are the Free People pull-on shorts, and they are so cute.
Maybe you've seen these dupe videos before. A woman will show you a pair of Free People shorts, for example, that maybe cost around $100. But then she'll show you the Amazon copy that costs only $20.
The Amazon shorts that I'm going to share next with you look identical to these, though. I haven't tried them on yet. I just took them out of the package, but they have the same, cute little buttons on the front.
Finding these dupes and then buying them provided the kind of quick dopamine hit that was hard to come by during COVID. And even now, years later, I've found it impossible to kick the habit. And I know I should. Fast fashion is horrible for the environment and raises all sorts of ethical questions about child labor and worker conditions. It adds up financially when you're stockpiling knockoff sweaters. So I called up the Post style critic, Rachel Tashjian, for some help.
Well, I actually have to say it's very impressive that you know this is a problem. Because I think there are a lot of shoppers and consumers who have just gotten so used to shopping in this way and simply think they've found this great, intelligent, and affordable workaround.
Rachel also says there's a good economic reason to try to reset my bad shopping habits now. Tariffs.
The dupes that you're talking about, a lot of those things are made in China. So they're going to be subject to some pretty hefty tariffs come May 2nd. So I think a lot of us who have this fast fashion addiction, or even who use this to shop pretty casually, things are really going to change in that regard.
From the newsroom and style pages of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Colby Irkowitz. It's Tuesday, April 29th. Today, President Trump's more than 100% tariffs on goods from China are about to drive up the cost of clothing. Rachel takes us through why this is going to hit fast fashion prices particularly hard and shares her tips for shopping smarter. Well, Rachel, hi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So, Rachel, you are our fashion critic, our resident fashion critic at The Post. And you recently wrote about taking this moment, Trump's latest round of tariffs, and using it as a moment to reset our relationship with shopping, particularly shopping for clothes. We heard about my bad shopping habits. Are there any bad shopping habits that you're trying to break?
Well, I think we all have bad shopping habits, actually. I think we have a very warped relationship to our closets, to consumerism, to even, things as woo-woo as desire. And, that high even that I think a lot of people get either having something in a shopping bag that's new or, more likely having packages when we come home of new things that we've ordered. That is really an addictive feeling. And so I really feel this is a moment where all of the sudden we're going to have to ask, well, what do we really need and how much are we willing to pay for it?
Right. And so at a time when you're facing so much economic uncertainty, it's really, people are going to have to balance need versus want. Rachel, I know you're going to give us some shopping tips, but before that, I'm hoping you can just explain a little bit how U.S. trade policy is impacting the price of clothing, and specifically fast fashion items that are shipped directly from China by e-commerce companies like Shein and Temu, or sold on Amazon, which I should say now, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos also owns The Washington Post.
So part of the reason why fast fashion from places like Shein and Temu has been so cheap is that these companies are able to ship under what is called the de minimis loophole. And that means that any package coming from China, as well as a handful of other countries, that is under $800 is not subject to import duties. So, it's pretty hard to get a bill of $800 on Shein because so many of the things are $5, $6, $7, $8. And Trump has closed this loophole that's taking effect on May 2nd. And that means that consumers are going to have to start paying fees on these pieces. Now, some companies are already making adjustments to their pricing in order to incorporate those fees into their clothing. So, for example, Shein and Temu have both announced that they're increasing their prices. When you're used to paying that rock bottom price and we're, entering a moment of economic precarity, any increase is, of course, a pain point. And this is actually, it's interesting, this is impacting companies on the higher end of fashion as well. Hermes, which makes almost all of its products in France, will also be subject to a new tariff under Trump's rules. And they have also announced that they will be increasing the prices of their goods in the United States.
Okay, so we know that prices are going to go up, but there's always been other reasons that we should think about our clothing differently, right? Can you talk about some of the other ethical or environmental reasons that you would push people to break up with fast fashion?
Of course. I think, first of all, one question that we should always ask ourselves when we can find the cheaper version of something that's more expensive, why is it less expensive? Very often someone else is paying the cost for your less expensive item. And what that means is that there are garment workers in China, in Bangladesh, and in Malaysia, which are 3 countries, just to name some of the top countries that produce these kinds of garments, where they may not be getting paid a fair wage. So I think it's really important when you see a t-shirt that is $5, for example, you have to remember that a retailer will usually mark up a piece. Obviously, they're not selling it for the price it costs to produce it. And so if that is the marked up price, what is the person who is making that garment being paid?
That's a really great point.
Yeah. And then, of course, I think there's the environmental piece of this. The reality is that if we're shopping at fast fashion sites or from fast fashion brands, those clothes tend to fall apart pretty quickly. And it means that we're throwing out clothing rather than repairing it or mending it.
Well, then what about buying from American-made brands? Part of the reason that's been given for even having these tariffs is to encourage more American manufacturing, right? So is that a real option for people?
The simple answer is no. And, while I was reporting my piece about tariffs and secondhand shopping and fast fashion, I spoke with a designer named Natalie Shannon, who about 2 decades ago decided to buy a shuttered factory in Alabama and began making and manufacturing clothing in the United States. She uses organically grown cotton, mostly from Texas, some of it from other parts of the South. And it's spun and knitted in the Carolinas. And for her to make just a simple, plain white t-shirt is $70.
I'm also seeing, I've looked on their site because I know that you talked to her. I'm seeing a t-shirt on here for $268.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's a price point that, a lot of people are not going to be able to purchase.
Absolutely, especially if you're used to, as many of us are, buying a Hanes t-shirt for $6.
Yeah, so I guess the tariffs are going to increase the cost of clothes coming from abroad, but also to buy American is already probably prohibitively expensive for a lot of people.
Exactly. And, we just don't have the farming infrastructure anymore in this country to even produce the kinds of fabrics that are needed to make clothing domestically. And of course, you have to remember, most fast fashion is not made of cotton or, silk. It's made of synthetic fabrics, polyesters, and that sort of thing. And we also don't have the infrastructure in this country to produce those kinds of fabrics either. So, if we do want to begin making fabrics and producing a lot of clothing in the United States again, it will be, I would say probably a couple of decades before that could really be a reality.
So Rachel, I also wanted to ask you, because you wrote in a recent column that for a lot of American shoppers, myself included, we've forgotten how much a decently made item of clothing should cost when it's new.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? How we've kind of lost perspective on what should clothing cost?
Well, one of my great frustrations has been that fashion companies have really warped our sense of how much things should cost. On the higher end, when I go to Fashion Week, for example, and cover, the shows in Milan and Paris, I really increasingly am just thinking, but who in the world can afford these things?
Right.
It was not so long ago that a middle-class shopper could kind of say, okay, I'm going to put aside some money for a couple of months and get a Prada handbag or a jacket from Dior. And that's just impossible now.
Right.
And then, of course, in a lot of the brands that we're used to shopping at the mall, like a J. Crew or a Banana Republic, are very often in this cycle of constant sales. So the price that we see on the price tag, we often think, well, shouldn't I wait because, I could log on the site tomorrow and they're suddenly saying, surprise, it's spring, 30% off everything.
Totally.
And then on top of that, we have fast fashion telling us, well, I can get you that thing that you're looking at J. Crew or Anthropologie for a tenth of the cost.
Right.
So it is so confusing to figure this out. I will say I go into J. Crew and Banana all the time. I look at the seams of things. I feel the fabrics. I try things on. And I do the same at Anthropologie. I would still say that those products to me, in general, feel pretty good. The quality is better noticeably than what I see from Shein or from an Amazon dupe or from H&M. Not always, but consistently enough. So to me, that kind of remains the standard of what we should expect to pay for something.
After the break, Rachel shares her shopping tips to find deals even as prices go up. We'll be right back.
I'm Fennett Narapil, and I'm a health reporter for The Washington Post. My job is to cover public health, and that means I'm writing about infectious disease threats like COVID, Mpox, and bird flu, and I'm also holding the federal government and state government officials accountable for how they respond to these disease threats. So when we write about public health issues, we want to serve our readers by going deep into the science and by making sure that what they're reading is authoritative information that's been vetted by experts and written by people who've covered these issues for years. We want to empower people to live their best lives and to protect themselves and their loved ones. And that's what subscriber-supported work does, is that it gives me the time and resources to really spend on a story. When you subscribe to The Washington Post, you support this kind of journalism and the people behind it. I'm Fennett Narapil, and I'm one of the people behind the Post.
Okay, Rachel, we know tariffs are going to raise prices. So now I want your tips. How can bargain or budget-conscious shoppers like me find better quality clothes for a good price?
I think this is the time to get interested in secondhand clothing. And the secondhand market has been booming, actually, for the past, 5 or 6 years. There are so many platforms, from the RealReal and Vestiaire, which are more high-end, to things like ThredUp, and Etsy is another.
Like Poshmark.
Yeah. Where you can actually find, this is one of my favorite tips, if you add NWT, new with tags, to any of your searches, you can very often find the version of the thing that you are already looking for that is new and that someone bought or received as a gift and thought, I'm never going to wear this. So this is really a great moment for, I think, consumers to learn some of the tricks of the trade for secondhand and vintage shopping.
I mean, I will say that in addition to my addiction to fast fashion, I'm also just like addicted to shopping in general. And so I have, in addition to that, shopped at consignment shops and thrift stores, like also as a supplement to my to my Amazon and Forever 21 shopping, and I love it. So I agree that consignment shops and thrift shopping is a great way to avoid these tariffs, but I wonder if some people are just really like intimidated by that.
Of course, it is very intimidating, and it takes a lot of time. I mean, I think a great place to start is to think about brands you know and already like. If you already like Free People and you know how their clothing fits, it's going to be a lot easier to go on an app like, Poshmark, or there's a site I love called Gem, which kind of scrapes scrapes eBay and Etsy and all of these secondhand platforms.
No way.
It makes things a lot easier.
Cool.
Yeah. And so if J. Crew's jeans fit me wonderfully, or there was a pair of, chinos that they made 10 years ago that they don't make anymore. I mean, that's a great place to start, is just to know, okay, like a size 32 in J. Crew pants is going to fit me really well, or a size 10, or,
Yeah.
So I do think that's like, start with what you already know you like.
That's really good advice. Any other tips for people that are new to that type of shopping?
I think a really important piece of secondhand shopping is to know your measurements, especially if you're thinking about doing some secondhand shopping online. It's very easy to message the person who is selling something and say, hey, would you mind just taking a tape measure and telling me what, the measurements are of this skirt, and then actually seeing, how that comports with what your measurements are. And that, ensures that you won't have to return something. I think also, focus on things that are classic. And I don't mean things that are preppy or are boring. I mean things
like a white button-down shirt.
Exactly. I like to think when I am shopping, I look at a piece that I find really interesting and I think, are there 3 different ways that I can wear this? Are there 3 outfits that I can make with things that I already have in my wardrobe? And is this serving a purpose that is different than what I would otherwise wear in place of this? And, I think another thing just to really keep in mind is we need to think more about what brings us pleasure to wear and perhaps less about what other people are thinking about what we're wearing.
What's trendy.
Yeah. And, I hear from so many readers that, well, I just don't want to be showing up in the same thing over and over again. But ideally, you have things in your closet that fit you well and that you like so much that you enjoy wearing them over and over again. I really feel that way.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people who feel that way. And I assure you that if you wear something and people have already seen it, they either won't remember or they see that you're really comfortable and happy in it.
Right.
And they're like, wow, they look really great. I'm so glad to see them wearing that again.
Yeah. What would you say to people, and I wonder if you've heard this from readers, maybe people that are not an average size, someone who might be really petite or maybe someone who's plus size. I feel like on Amazon and these different sites, the size ranges can be really broad. Is it harder for people who are not, quote, your typical size to find clothes this way?
For sure. And I do hear this a lot from readers, because I think a lot of clothing that tends to be vintage or secondhand, I mean, a lot of it comes from a different time period where our bodies were different.
Right.
So I mean, my best advice for someone who is, not a tiny size or is not a kind of typical fashion size, if you will, is to use the search functions of these websites. When you go on the RealReal, you can narrow down what it is that you're searching for by size. And you can also set up email sort of alerts for particular kinds of products. So like, let's say you really are wanting a black linen jumpsuit. and you're a size 14, you can set up an alert for that and you'll get an email every time something that fits those parameters comes into the store. Yeah, so you're not hunting all the times. And also, a great tailor is a big help. I have bought pieces that are, $25 and I've spent twice that on getting it tailored. And it really is worth it to me.
Yeah, so it actually fits the way you want it to fit. Like I said, I'm a big fan of secondhand shopping. But for people who still want to buy new clothes, do you have any tips for them on how to do that in a smarter way?
I have some sort of strange advice, which is to actually shop more and to shop more without buying anything. If let's say you're on your lunch break and you have an extra 30 minutes, go into a store and just try things on. Remember, there is no pressure to buy anything.
Yeah.
See how things fit and see how they feel. And what are you thinking about the next day or days later? Is that skirt that you tried on still really resonating with you? Is your mind really lingering over it? Or have you totally forgotten it? I think if we looked more without that pressure or that feeling or desire to buy, we're going to know better when we're really wanting something, as opposed to that moment where you're in the dressing room and you're like, oh God, this coat is going to change my life. Yeah. I think that's something that has actually really helped me, because if you become a little bit more of a connoisseur of what you like, then you become a little bit snobbier about what you actually want to have.
Yeah, and a little more strategic.
Exactly, yeah. And I know that might sound to some people like, don't eat the truffles, just smell them. But I do think that can be really beneficial. And I think focusing on things that will supplement what you already have and really interrogating yourself and your wardrobe about like, okay, do I really need this? And knowing that it's okay to say, I do really need or want this.
Yeah. For most of my shopping life, I've bought things because I really want them, but not necessarily because I need any of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's true of all of us. And in fact, one of the pleasures, of course, of fashion is that it conflates want and need. And in certain ways, I don't want to discount that. Like I was talking to another colleague of mine yesterday about the Beyonce tour this summer. And I said, it is very important that if you feel that you need a cowboy hat for this concert, you should get it because, that's going to be an incredible event and moment in your life. But again, like, do we need a new outfit for every wedding that we go to? Do we need an entirely new wardrobe to return to the office? I'm not sure that we do.
Yeah. Or like an entirely new wardrobe when you go on vacation. I feel like every time I go on vacation, I'm like, well, I clearly need 3 new bathing suits and 3 like tropical looking dresses, and they will all arrive on my doorstep within 48 hours.
Exactly.
Well, Rachel, you have inspired me to try to get my fix a little bit in a more responsible way. Thank you so much, and we'll continue looking to you for great shopping tips.
Thanks so much.
Rachel Tashjian is a fashion critic for The Washington Post. And speaking of Trump's tariffs and Amazon, the White House slammed the company over reports that it was considering listing how much tariffs had caused prices to go up, calling it, quote, hostile and a political act. President Trump called founder Jeff Bezos on Tuesday to complain about it. Amazon then disputed the claim, but said that it had considered listing some tariff information on its Haul site, which is a low-cost site similar to Temu. A spokesperson for the company later said, quote, this was never approved and it's not going to happen. After his call with Bezos, Trump told reporters, quote, he solved the problem quickly, he did the right thing, and he's a good guy. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you love the show, help other people discover it by leaving a rating on Spotify or a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Today's show was produced by Laura Benshoff. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Lucy Perkins. Thanks to Lindsay Underwood. I'm Colby Irkowitz. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.